welcome to our next lesson. So in this lesson, we're going to answer the question, what is Schema SQL? So I mentioned in a previous lesson that one thing I really like about this tool db-fiddle is it has separate windows for Schema SQL and Query SQL. So in this lesson, we're going to focus on talking about Schema SQL. First, for those who have never been exposed to SQL that much, let's talk a little bit about what SQL is in general. So SQL stands for Structured Query Language, and it operates against a database. And what's a database? A database is simply a collection of tables. Well, what do I mean by table? Well, let me give you an example. Let's switch to this Word document. So this isn't the way tables look actually inside of a database, but this is a great visual representation of what a table does. And a table organizes our data in columns and rows. In this table, the users table, that's the name of the table, we've got 5 rows. The first is a header row, so really we just have 4 rows of data, and we have 5 columns. The columns and rows intersect into cells, and that's where the data is placed. So here you can see some names, we've got some ages, here we have a blank age, it's missing, and so forth. So what is this table? This is the users table. What users are we talking about? Well, for this course, we're going to pretend that we're building a web app for e-commerce, perhaps something like Amazon where we sell goods online. And we need to build some tables into a database where we can store our data as users buy things on our website. So most modern e-commerce websites use a relational database as their back end, and not only does the application interact with the database by storing data as you use the website, but also analysts like you analyze the data by writing queries to pull the data out. Let's go back to the code window. So again, we were talking about Schema SQL. You can see right here, Schema SQL, underneath it says create table, insert, update. And that's basically the main jobs of Schema SQL. Creating tables, inserting, which means putting new data into tables, and then updating, which is changing data that's already existing. We did that in the previous lesson when we changed that woman's age from 45 to 44. The etc. refers to other things that are less commonly needed but are definitely important, things like deleting data and deleting tables from the database. So let me paste in some code here. First thing I'm going to do though is change my database to PostgreSQL 13. You'll sometimes hear PostgreSQL referred to as just Postgres for short, by the way. So now I can paste the code in. Okay. So again, this is the one thing I really like about db-fiddle is the fact that you have the schema code on the left-hand side. There are a number of other SQL fiddle type tools, and I'll go over those in a bonus video. But db-fiddle is the only one I've found that has this split window. And one reason I really like it is even though this course is focusing on Query SQL on the right, while you're writing your queries in Query SQL, you're going to be referring to some really useful information in the Schema SQL. And so it's really nice to have it there next to you while you're writing your queries. And I won't be asking you to learn how to write this kind of SQL. That's not really the role of a SQL analyst. But you do need to read it because it has some really useful information. So let's talk about the two main things we're doing in this code. We're creating a table in the first SQL statement. You can tell this is a separate SQL statement because it ends with a semicolon. We'll be doing that as well on Query SQL as well. If we have multiple SQL statements, we'll end each one with a semicolon. Table creation, the first statement here, that's normally done by a database administrator, otherwise known as a DBA or data engineer. Their job is to figure out what data needs to be collected in your organization and how that data should be organized into tables. So generally a create table statement like this will be written by a DBA or data engineer. Whereas the data insertion statement right here, that will typically be done by the application. So as someone uses our web application to register and buy products and so forth, the actions they take on the website will trigger code that will insert the data into the tables in the database. Now, for these two reasons, the fact that create table is done by DBAs, data engineers, and that inserting data is done by the application, normally as a query analyst, you will not even have this code visible to you. But we really like having it here in this course. And that's why, as you can see in future lessons, while you're writing query SQL, there's some really useful information in the Schema SQL that will help you know how to write your queries best. Now you may be wondering, what am I going to do at work given that you're saying I can't access this Schema SQL and it's got really useful information? Well, luckily SQL has thought of that, and there's some SQL commands, query SQL commands, that will allow you to access the relevant information without seeing the actual code. And we'll go over that in a future lesson. But for now, I need you to go ahead and paste this Schema SQL in. You can download it from the website this lesson is hosted on. So go ahead and paste it into here, because we don't have a DBA nor an actual web application to do this job for us, so we're going to do it ourselves by pasting in the code. And you're going to need to actually leave this code here as we write query SQL on the right. Why do you need to leave it? Well, it actually needs to run every time you click run to run your query SQL. And that's because every time the tool returns results from your query SQL, it deletes the database. It does that to save space and save money. A lot of these tools are free. So because it deletes the database every time, when you run a query, it's going to first run the Schema SQL to recreate the tables and insert the data. So the table and data, in other words, the entire database that you're going to use, has to be recreated each time your query SQL runs. Now that obviously means that we're going to be limited in how much data we can store in these tables, since we have to recreate it every time. But that's okay, because I'm going to keep the number of rows relatively small so you can think through examples and make sure you're getting the answer that you expected as you write query SQL. So our tables are not going to have that many rows in them, but we'll still be able to learn all the advanced SQL tricks that you'll need for your job. So go ahead and paste in this code and click run just to make sure it runs successfully. Want to make sure you have the right database picked. So if you get this result below where it says results, there are no results, that's actually what you want. That means it ran successfully. Okay, we'll see you in the next lesson.